This is Daily Homeless News, where tell the stories no one else will. In 2025, as the United States grapples with persistent inflation, soaring housing costs, and the end of COVID-19 relief programs, the American dream feels more elusive than ever for millions. Over 770,000 Americans, from children to veterans, are living without a roof over their heads. In a nation that prides itself on economic strength and the promise of opportunity, the homelessness crisis, including in New Mexico, exposes deep cracks of inequality and a faltering support system. How can a modern society allow hundreds of thousands of its citizens to live in tents, cars, or under bridges? This is not just a story of numbers, but a call to action to restore compassion and justice in America. Today, we will explore the harsh realities behind the facade of the United States, specifically the challenges faced by New Mexico, a state that attracts millions of visitors each year. If you care about these real stories and want to help raise awareness, don't forget to hit like and share this video with your friends and family. Every interaction not only spreads the message, but also helps promote positive change in the community. Let's speak up and take action together to bring hope and justice to those struggling with this harsh reality. The stark reality of homelessness in New Mexico. The numbers paint a stark and troubling picture of homelessness in New Mexico, a crisis growing faster than most realize. According to a January 2024 count by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, 4,649 people were recorded as homeless on a single night in the state. Albuquerque alone accounted for 2,740 of those individuals, while the remaining 1,909 were scattered across other parts of New Mexico. This figure reflects a sharp 48% increase from 2023 and an even more alarming 50% rise compared to 2022, underscoring a situation that is quickly spinning out of control. Over the past 7 years, from 2017 to 2024, the number of homeless people in New Mexico surged by 87%, which is more than double the national increase of 40%. In Albuquerque specifically, the growth rate reached an astonishing 108%. These trends place New Mexico at the forefront of the worsening homelessness epidemic facing the nation. The severity of the crisis is further highlighted by the fact that nearly half, 48.4%, of those experiencing homelessness in New Mexico lack any form of shelter. The New Mexico Department of Health adds to this grim reality, revealing that almost 31,000 homeless individuals, including 869 children under 5 years old, sought medical care at non-federal hospitals between 2019 and 2023. These figures suggest the problem is far more widespread than official counts indicate. Homeless in America is no longer just an urban problem. New Mexico's increasing homeless population reflects nationwide trends documented by HUD's 2024 report, which shows an 18% rise in homelessness across the country from 2023 to 2024, reaching a record 771,480 people on a single January night. Though the report does not specify New Mexico's data separately, the state faces mounting pressure from factors shared across the U.S., soaring housing costs, inflation, and a rising influx of migrants, all of which strain existing housing and social support systems. Life on the streets in New Mexico is unrelenting. Those without shelter endure blistering summer heat and harsh desert nights with no respite. Many struggle to access clean water and adequate food, while also facing daily risks of violence and illness. Compounding their challenges is the frequent loss of identification documents. Over 80% of homeless individuals in Albuquerque have lost IDs or social security cards during forced cleanups of encampments, cutting them off from vital services. Shelters often operate at or beyond capacity, and may deny access to those battling mental illness or substance abuse, forcing them to survive on their own. Tragically, the health toll is immense. Homeless individuals in New Mexico often face a life expectancy nearly 30 years shorter than the general population due to untreated diseases, chronic stress, and social marginalization. Laws criminalizing public sleeping or loitering only trap them further in a cycle of fines and incarceration, making recovery even more elusive. Looking ahead, the outlook remains grim without bold action. Housing prices in New Mexico have skyrocketed by 70% since 2017, while wages have barely kept pace, increasing a mere 15%. Inflation continues to drive up the cost of basic necessities, leaving many families with little left over to afford rent. The crisis is no longer confined to cities like Albuquerque. It's spreading into smaller towns and rural areas such as Las Cruces and Santa Fe. HUD's recent data also spotlights a troubling rise in homeless children nationwide, a trend painfully mirrored in New Mexico's overwhelmed shelters. Families, seniors relying on fixed incomes, and even those juggling multiple jobs are increasingly vulnerable. The homeless in America now encompass a broad cross-section of society, working, poor, elderly, and vulnerable populations, with all just one financial setback away from losing their homes. How close is this reality? And what will it take to stem this rising tide before it swallows even more lives? New Mexico's social safety net, like much of America's, is a patchwork of good intentions stretched thin over gaping holes. The state has made strides since 2016. Emergency shelter capacity has doubled, and Albuquerque's Housing Choice Voucher program supports 4,000 families, covering part of their rent. In 2023, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham signed an executive order establishing the Housing Investment Council, directing $82 million toward affordable housing initiatives. A new law providing free identification documents for the homeless has eased access to critical services, a small but vital step. Federally, HUD's Continuum of Care program funnels $3.6 billion nationwide into shelters, transitional housing, and permanent solutions. But only 25% of eligible households receive aid, like Section 8 vouchers, due to chronic underfunding. Yet the system is buckling under pressure. Only 20% of those entering shelters in New Mexico transition to permanent housing within 2 years, a stark indicator of systemic failure. The state needs an estimated $11.4 million annually to build 859 additional supportive housing units, but funding consistently falls short. Affordable housing stock has plummeted 50% since 2020, leaving families stranded on years-long wait lists. Immigration policies add another layer of complexity. New Mexico's proximity to the Mexican border makes it a hotspot for migrants, many of whom face homelessness due to tightened policies under the Trump administration since January 2025. Programs like 287, which empower local law enforcement to detain undocumented immigrants, have driven many to avoid shelters for fear of deportation, pushing them deeper into the shadows of homelessness in America. Certain groups bear the brunt of this crisis. The elderly, making up 21% of New Mexico's homeless population, struggle on fixed pensions as rents soar. Low and middle income workers, even those juggling 2 jobs, are drowning. A full-time minimum wage earner needs 86 hours a week to afford a 1-bedroom apartment at market rates. Native Americans, who represent 17% of the homeless, despite being only 11% of the state's population, that face systemic barriers rooted in historical inequities. People of color, single mothers escaping domestic violence, and LGBTQI individuals are disproportionately at risk, as are youth aging out of foster care. Nearly 105,557 renters spend over 30% of their income on housing teetering on the edge of eviction. The elderly living alone, particularly women, face heightened risks without a support network. The homeless in America are a cross-section of society betrayed by a system that fails to protect them. How can we call this a safety net when so many are left to fall? The homelessness crisis in New Mexico is a wound that festers in the heart of our society, exposing the raw edges of inequality, neglect, and broken promises. It's a crisis that demands not just our attention, but our outrage, our empathy, and our action. As the numbers climb and the stories multiply, the question looms, how did we get here? And what will it take to forge a different future? The homeless in America are not just statistics. They are called to confront the systems that have failed them and to build a society that values every life. Homelessness in New Mexico is far more than just a story of personal failure. It is the result of a complicated and interconnected web of economic, social, and political factors. At the heart of this crisis lies the housing shortage, which has escalated dramatically over recent years. Since 2017, rental prices in the state have soared by 70%, with the average cost for a one-bedroom apartment in Albuquerque now reaching around $1,200 monthly. Yet wages have remained largely stagnant, increasing only about 15% during that same period. This disparity, combined with inflation driving up the costs of essentials like food, healthcare, and utilities, leaves many families and individuals with barely enough to cover rent. Even those juggling two jobs find themselves cost-burdened, spending more than 30% of their income on housing, vulnerable to eviction over one unexpected medical bill or vehicle repair. The economic downturn has compounded the problem further. Unemployment in New Mexico has risen from 3.6% in 2022 to 4.1% in 2024, pushing even more households toward the edge of homelessness. But focusing on economics alone misses much of the picture. Mental health issues and substance abuse are major contributors. Yet the oversimplified and damaging stereotype that the homeless in America are merely lazy or addicts obscures the truth. The deinstitutionalization of mental health care during the 1960s left a significant gap, and New Mexico's limited mental health infrastructure only deepens the problem. A vast majority of those needing treatment simply cannot access it, leaving many to slip further into homelessness. Systemic racism also plays a painful role. Native Americans and communities of color face entrenched barriers to housing and employment. The legacy of discriminatory practices like redlining is still evident today. Single-parent households, especially those led by women escaping domestic violence, often find themselves without shelter. Young people aging out of foster care enter adulthood with little to no support, while elderly individuals living on fixed income struggle to keep a roof over their heads. 21% of the homeless population in the state is over 55. Politically, the system is faltering. Chronic underfunding means only a quarter of eligible households receive any form of housing assistance. Policies such as 287 and intensified border enforcement since early 2025 have decreased migrant flows but left undocumented residents in precarious situations, fearful of seeking help. New Mexico's geographic position near the border, combined with migrants arriving from unstable regions like Chiapas, Mexico, further strains already limited resources. Despite all this, homelessness remains a low priority in political agendas. While voters consistently rank housing affordability as a major concern, many political candidates avoid addressing the crisis head-on, allowing it to worsen unchecked. For some, homelessness may seem like a choice, rejecting shelter rules that prohibit pets or demand sobriety, but for most, it's a harsh trap created created by a society failing to provide affordable housing, living wages, and adequate support systems. These complex forces don't just create homelessness, they imprison people within it, making any path to escape seem impossible. What does it say about us as a society if we continue to ignore the root causes of this growing crisis? The government's response to homelessness in New Mexico is a mix of ambition and frustration. At the state level, New Mexico has invested heavily. $82 million in 2023 went toward affordable housing, including 4,300 multifamily units for low-income residents. Albuquerque's purchase of hotels for supportive housing, funded by $2 million from the CARES Act, has provided shelter for hundreds. The Housing First model, which prioritizes permanent housing without preconditions, has shown promise, reducing homelessness by 25% in pilot programs. A 2023 law providing free identification documents has helped thousands access services. Federally, HUD allocated $3.6 billion nationwide in 2023 to address homelessness, supporting shelters and transitional housing, yet these efforts fall short of the need. Only 20% of those entering shelters in New Mexico transition to permanent housing within 2 years, and the state lacks 859 supportive housing units, requiring an estimated $11.4 million annually to address. The affordable housing shortage, down 50% since 2020, is a crippling bottleneck. Immigration policies complicate matters further. Tightened border controls and programs like 287 have reduced migrant inflows but left undocumented residents vulnerable, often choosing homelessness over deportation risks. Political polarization stalls progress with debates over funding and priorities slowing action. The system is reactive, not preventative, offering band-aids for a gaping wound. New Mexico's investment is substantial, but it's a fraction of what's needed to meet the demand. The core issue is clear. Without a massive increase in affordable housing and a stronger safety net, the cycle of homelessness will persist. What would it take to build a system that prevents homelessness before it starts? The future of homelessness in New Mexico hangs in the balance. Without bold action, the crisis will worsen. HUD projects that nationwide, the number of homeless could surpass 800,000 by 2026 if trends continue, driven by rising rents, stagnant wages, and a potential economic slowdown. In New Mexico, the housing crisis shows no signs of abating, and climate-driven disasters like wildfires could displace more families. The ripple effects of immigration policies and economic strain will only deepen the problem, pushing more into the ranks of the homeless in America. Yet, there's hope on the horizon. Models like Housing First, which reduced homelessness by 35% in Finland, could be scaled up in New Mexico. The state's investment in supportive housing and vouchers is a start, but it needs to be supercharged. With an estimated $11.4 million annually, New Mexico could build enough housing to cut homelessness by 25% by 2025, according to the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. Community efforts like the New Mexico Coalition to End Homelessness are rallying support, but they need broader backing. Individuals can take steps, building savings, seeking support, advocating for change, but society must act too. Stigmatizing homelessness, supporting affordable housing policies, and investing in prevention are critical. The path forward depends on collective will. Will New Mexico rise to the challenge, or will it let this crisis define its future? Homelessness in New Mexico is a mirror reflecting our society's deepest failures. It exposes the chasm between the American dream and the reality for thousands sleeping on the streets. It's a crisis born of skyrocketing rents, stagnant wages, and a safety net riddled with holes. It's a story of systemic racism, political neglect, and a culture that too often looks away. The homeless in America are not others. They are our neighbors, our veterans, our elders, our youth. They are us, one misfortune away from the same fate. This crisis demands action. Support organizations like the New Mexico Coalition to End Homelessness. Advocate for policies that build affordable housing and strengthen the safety net. Challenge the stigma that paints the homeless as less than human. Reflect on your own role. What can you do to ensure no one in your community sleeps on the street? Share your thoughts, your ideas, your outrage. Together we can rewrite this story not as one of despair, but of hope, compassion, and change. What will you do to make that happen?